Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during this presentation today, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the August 31st edition of CropTalk. Looks like we're going to be getting some harvest weather here over the next little while, so that's good to see. And thought it would be an opportunity to talk a little bit about pre-harvest desiccation, reasons for, and things we should be watching out for as we go out into the field and do these things. Just kind of a heads up and what we should look for as we're doing it. So we got Kim Brown Livingston on today. She's done, I guess, quite a few of these presentations in the past, so she's got lots of knowledge regarding this, so glad to have her on today. And then from there, we'll go into the crop scouting panel where we've had a few questions come in through the week, and we'll try to get some of them answered as well. So with that, one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to have Kim's presentation, and I'm going to be flipping the slides for her, so she will be on. So Kim, if you're ready to go, your first slide is up.
Yeah, I can see that. Thanks very much. So thanks everybody for listening this morning. I am joining on my phone. I'm just having technical difficulties with my laptop, not able to present. So Lionel's going to move the slides for me. Hopefully I remember to say advance the slide or next slide, please. But Lionel will probably be able to keep up. He hopefully knows what I'm doing. Anyway, so if we can have the next slide, please, Lionel. Yeah, wanting to talk a bit about harvest management. We're doing this basically almost a month after we did it last year. We are a little bit late on the peas. A lot of the peas have been desiccated already. A lot of pea harvest has gone on already, but I've still included that here. We do have some, there are some late peas out there, but just in general, talking about harvest management, what purpose are we going after? Like, are we looking for crop dry down? Are we looking for weed dry down? Are we looking for both? So we've got 3 different products that we're using for harvest management, and they have very different applications. So we need to be very clear about what we're using this for, because our expectations of how this product is supposed to work need to be very clear. We need to be very clear about which product we're using and why, in order to, not be disappointed in the end result. Next slide, please. So we basically got 3 products. I'm going to talk about Roundup, basically glyphosate, but I talk generally about Roundup. That's the heritage product, and there are many generic glyphosates on the market. You need to check the labels; they are not all the same. So I'm going to talk about Roundup and what is actually on the Roundup label. If you're using a different glyphosate than a different brand name, then you need to check that label and make sure that all registrations are the same for the use you want to use it for. I'm going to talk about heat. That's saflufenicil. There's the heat brands. And then I'm also going to talk about Reglone, which is Diquat. Again, there are other products on the market. I am most familiar with the heritage product Diquat, or Reglone, sorry. So I'm going to be talking about that one. And again, please check your labels and make sure that all of the uses that you want to use it for are actually registered on the product that you're choosing. And you need to know your market. So just because it's registered doesn't mean your buyer will accept it. And so, if you've got a contract and you know where your product is going, you know where your crop is going, that's great. But sometimes, you end up selling to somebody different, or things don't work out, or you've got extra over the contract or that type of thing. And it's really important to know, what the other buyers are looking for as well. In some cases, especially with oats, and we're talking about, Roundup use on oats, some buyers will take, some will not. So depending where those oats might be going will affect, again, what you should be doing to them before they're harvested. So next slide, please. So when we're talking about Roundup or glyphosate, grain moisture has to be under 30%. And that's because we don't want any more moisture going into that grain. By the time we hit that 30% moisture in the grain, we start to hit dry down. And that's extremely important because we do not want glyphosate to get into that grain seed, that seed itself. If we're above 30% moisture, there is still going to be translocation, and that glyphosate is going to get into that seed, and that is going to affect germination. It's also going to affect your test weight. It's going to affect your yields because it actually stops that kernel. That kernel basically hasn't reached its full growth, and it needs to reach its full growth and then start to dry down, and that's where that critical 30% moisture is. So when we're looking at wheat, barley, oats, canary seed, now canary seed's a pretty small seed, so it's hard to tell on this one, but we're talking that hard dough stage, and I've got some pictures of that coming up in a minute. When we're talking about canola and mustard, the pods are green to yellow. Most seeds are yellow to brown, so we don't want to have color change on most of them. For peas, we want the majority of the pods brown. We want 75 to 80% of those pods brown, and for flax, we want the majority of the bolls brown, 75 to 80% of those brown. Next slide, please.
Kim, before I go to the next slide, a question came in and was wondering about aim in desiccation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can cover that at the end. Maybe if we'll go through, well, actually, sorry, I can,
You can that's fine.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. That's carfentrazone. Yeah, and there are applications for that as well, and not commonly used, but again, that use might be increasing as we do see more desiccation, true desiccation actually taking place versus weed dry down kind of thing. So when we're looking at Roundup, the purpose of using Roundup at harvest would be for pre-harvest perennial weed control. If you have annual weeds and you're trying to dry them down, this is not the product we need to be using because they were going to die anyways, and that's not what we're using this product for. Again, glyphosate is there for our thistles, our quackgrass, our dandelions, so any of our perennial weeds that we need to get that glyphosate into the root system, and we also need to get that because we want to take care of those. This is the time to do that. Those weeds right now, all of their energy, they spent their energy up until now growing and, maybe setting some seed, but a lot of them have, a good root system that they're coming back from next year because they're perennials. So now this is where the herbicides get translocated into that root system. And so they end up, this is the best time of the year to get good perennial weed control is right now. So now or even early fall, if you can get back on the fields for some early fall weed control. Anyways, but we're going after perennial weeds. We need good water volume because even though this is a systemic herbicide, we still want good coverage. Other crops that are covered, and I'm going to show you some pictures of the main crops, but there are lots of crops on the label. So again, if you're looking at that Roundup label, it's chickpeas, lentils, lupins, which we have a slight amount of those in the province. Fabas, we have a few of those, dry beans, camelina, soybeans, and some forages as well. So next slide, please. So when we're looking at, this is off of the Keep It Clean website. And so this is a really good website to go to. They've got a lot of information. There's some little YouTube videos or little videos there you can click on and you can watch. And they've got some really good stuff there for watching for timing, for timing your crops. And basically in here, they've got some statements here, general glyphosate information, where it's allowed. It's registered for pre-harvest weed control. It's not to be used as a desiccant. Again, pre-harvest weed control is very different than using it for crop dry down. They would talk about the grain moisture must be less than 30%. And this is to avoid unacceptable residue levels. And so again, if you just kind of read some of this stuff and basically, and then I think the last line in there, it says if we're using glyphosate pre-harvest weed control in a tank mixed with other products such as heat, the products must still be applied when the grain moisture is less than 30%. So you still have to wait. You can't go on earlier than that. And you also need that to be in the least mature part of the field. So that's very important. So you need to look at that whole field. You need to be looking at the least mature part of the field, and that has to be less than that 30% moisture. So, and this is because this is on the Keep It Clean page, and this is because we don't want to be finding those glyphosate residues in seed, in anything that we're exporting or sending away, because those residues will get picked up. They are tested for, and those residues will show up, and that's just not, we don't want to compromise our grain industry by putting things on at the wrong time. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at using glyphosate on canola, and these are pictures again, just right off that, Keep It Clean. So again, I encourage you to go to Keep It Clean, just type that into your browser and it'll pop right up. And so when we're looking at our canola here, so basically we're looking at 50 to 60% seed color change in the least mature areas of the field. And so if you're there, then you're confident that you're at less than 30% seed moisture. So the top ones need to be firm. They can be still green, but they can't squish. You don't want them to squish. The middle ones need to be mostly brown, at least have some color change on them, so at least some speckling at least on them. And the bottom ones need to be completely brown or black. And the recommended harvest, now this is 7 to 14 days after pre-harvest glyphosate application. That's probably a little optimistic. With really good weather, that can happen. But as we get later in the season, and if we end up with some cool weather, some wet weather, that's obviously going to be extended further out. But with good weather, 7 to 14 days, and you're looking at, and then you're looking at being able to combine. Next slide, please. So again, and here's a picture of for wheat. Now this is for using the thumbnail test. So if you push this picture with the circle in it there, where the thumb is, that's quite a watery looking kernel. And so if you press your thumbnail imprint into that, it doesn't stay. It just pops right back out really quickly. In the picture, the main picture there, you see where you've got the thumbnail imprint on those. There's two. He's done twice there on that one little wheat seed. And you've pressed your thumbnail in and it stays, like it doesn't pop back. So again, that tells you you're at that's that hard dose stage, you're at that 30% moisture. And so again, check your buyer, because wheat might not be accepted if it's treated with pre-harvest glyphosate. And again, make sure you're using the right product, that the label, whichever glyphosate you're using, is labeled for that use. Next slide, please. So this is barley. Now, it is registered for malt, food, and feed. However, most maltsters, malt barley just is not. It's not an accepted use. So even though it's registered, it's not an accepted use by the end buyer. And so that's something that's very important to know. And again, we're looking at that thumbnail. These are basically the same pictures as before, but you're looking for that thumbnail imprint to stay. And again, just know that your malt barley, you have to be very, very, very careful with that. And it's just generally assumed that it's not going to be accepted if it's treated with glyphosate, because that if it was sprayed too early, and then that will affect the germination, which obviously affects malting qualities. So next slide, please. So when we're looking at oats, and again, this is a nice picture of oats. So at less than 30% grain moisture, this is where you're, we're looking at, again, still do that thumbnail, that imprint test on oats. And again, be informed on this one. Again, recommended harvest, same as the other cereals. Is talking 7 to 14 days after pre-harvest, but that's probably a little optimistic unless we get some really, really, really nice fall weather. Again, check with your buyer, because with oats, some buyers will accept glyphosate treated oats and some will not. So, and make sure if you can't go to the original buyer that you were planning, make sure that your backup, what's your backup plan? Make sure wherever those oats are going, that using the glyphosate is an acceptable use. Next slide, please. So this is peas. Now I know, especially up in the Northwest there's a lot of pea harvest has gone on. I think probably for most of the rest of the province, a lot of desiccation or pre-harvest weed control has already occurred in peas, but I thought I'd have this in here anyways, just in case, because there are some quite late seeded fields around. So actually you kind of, in this case, what you look for, but you also listen for it. Most pods are going to be yellow to golden brown, and the seeds in the bottom pods are detached and they're going to rattle. So if you grab those pods and they're rattling, they're detached already. That's a good sign. And again, check with your buyer, because some pea buyers, the end use, wherever those are going, glyphosate is acceptable, and for other pea buyers, it is not acceptable. But something like Reglone might be instead. So you have to watch that. Next slide, please. So now this is Fava Beans. We do have. Sorry, I've just lost my presentation. On my end, sorry, I'll just watch it on your end. We do have some Fava Beans in the province there, and you can see, if you can go to the next slide. Sorry, Lionel. I think there, I've got some better writing on there, or it was like the dialogue is on there. Just give me a second, I've lost it on my computer. It's not having good luck with computers today. And so anyways, the leaves are drying down, stems are green to brown in color. You start getting a real black look to those pods. You know, Fabas have that distinct look to them. And for recommended harvest is minimum 7 days after pre-harvest glyphosate. And again, check with your buyer, because this is a crop that, depending on where they're going and the buyer, pre-harvest glyphosate might not be acceptable. Next slide, please. And for dry beans, what to look and to listen for, again, very similar to our peas. You want 80 to 90% of the leaves have dropped with dry beans, and your pod color needs to be changing. The upper pods can still be yellow, but you still want those bottom pods. You want that seed to be rattling in there. You need to hear that rattle. And when you split those beans open, they are not that really grass green inside, which a lot of them are still right now if you're looking at them. But most, and again, be informed, most dry bean dealers don't accept beans that have been treated. Some might, so be very careful that you know your end market and know what's acceptable before you apply any glyphosate on your dry beans. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at heat, so it's that saflufenicil, and again, I'm just going to talk about heat. The heat brands, they're for wheat and barley. Now, heat itself doesn't really do a lot to grasses, but it can be sprayed on grasses, again, to dry down those green weeds that are, those broadleaf weeds that are in there, in that canopy. We're looking at the hard dose stage, which is that Zadox stage 87, less than 30% moisture. So basically, it has to be minimum the moisture, or minimum the staging for glyphosate. Most times you're actually using heat with glyphosate. But it can be actually, if you're using it on its own, then you need to be actually a little bit drier. It needs to be a little bit more mature than if you're just using straight glyphosate. With canola, you want 60 to 75% of the seeds have changed color. So you need at least some speckling, and you'd prefer to be seeing, 3/4 of that when you're looking at that. You pull plants out of the ground, and, you look at the main stem generally, but you look at the side branches as well. But they'll be ripening bottom up, and you'll want at least 3/4 of that plant all from the bottom up to have some color change and be in that brown, or at least have some speckling on those upper pods as well. With dry beans, the stems need to be green to brown, the pods are mature, and 80 to 90% of the leaves have dropped. So these need to be, fairly well along before you could put heat on them. And the Fabas, again, 80% of the lower pods are turned black. Those middle pods are kind of yellow to tan, and the top pods can still be green, but that seed needs to be really firm. So next slide, please. So with heat, it's added in, especially with glyphosate, to speed the rate of dry down of crops and green weedy material. You must use merge. BSF has some great tech sheets on their website, or they have them available at your local dealer where you're getting your products from. And so they've got, mixing order, and they've got all that type of thing. It can be used alone, but you need to use the higher rate if you're not tank mixing it with glyphosate. Water volume should be 10 to 20 gallons. Pre-harvest interval is 2 to 3 days, but if you are mixing it with glyphosate, obviously that's going to take a bit longer, because you need time for that. You need time for that glyphosate to get into the root system of those perennial weeds that you're going after. And there are other crops registered for heat, and that's chickpeas, red lentils, soybeans, sunflowers, triticale, things like that. Next slide, please. Optimal timing. I've just got, I think, one picture here for you of Reglone on canola, and basically it's when 80% of the seeds have changed color. Again, so if you're using it on its own, then you need it to be that little bit more mature than if you're just using straight glyphosate. Canola timing for application can't be determined by pod color, so you actually have to open those pods and look at them. And again, we pull those plants out of the ground. We start checking from the bottom up, and you can divide that plant in, into thirds or into quarters, and you need to kind of visually estimate where, you need to have at least 80% of the seeds on that plant. 75 to 80% need to be changed color. And so seeds, so anyway, and again, those bottom seeds by that point will be black, and those middle seeds will have some change in them, have some color, at least speckling, and hopefully they'll be that nice, that shoe polish brown, we call it, that color. Anyways, can you, next slide, please, if you don't mind. For Reglone, which is Diquat, and again, there are other brands, but I'm just going to be talking about Reglone today. For canola, basically, now this is a true desiccant, so this is not for perennial weed control, this is not for weed control, this is to dry down the green material especially that's in the crops to aid with harvest. So we need 90% or the more of the seed has to be brown for Reglone. For peas, the bottom pods have to be ripe and dry. The seeds need to be detached from the pods. For flax, 75% of the bolls are brown. For dry beans, now it's only registered for red and white kidney. 80 to 90% of the leaves are gone, and 80% of the pods are yellowed. And for fabas, most plants are ripe and dry. The pods are fully filled, and the bottom pods are black or tan in color. Next slide, please. So basically the purpose of Reglone is to dry the immature green material at the top of indeterminate crops and green weeds to facilitate harvest. So this is a desiccant. This is not weed control. This is a desiccant, whereas this is a completely the other end of the spectrum from what we're using glyphosate for. It will not speed the maturity of green crops. So you cannot put it on green crops because basically you're going to lock in that green. Water volume, you need to have minimum 20 gallons. This is a contact product. We need lots and lots of coverage. If you're not going to put this on at 20 gallons, don't even bother. You've got to use tons of water with this one. For pre-harvest interval, canola 7 to 10 days, peas and flax when the sample tests dry. For fabas, 4 to 7 days. There are other crops as well which are registered, which are soybeans, sunflowers, chickpeas, potatoes, forage for seed production. So it has multiple uses. It's not going to do much or anything at all to your grass weeds or your grass crops, but it's for the broadleaf crops and the broadleaf weeds that are in those crops. Next slide, please. So Reglone, again, this is just off their website, so they've got some great pictures and they've got some good stuff on their website as well. I encourage you to check it out. So green seed levels will not decrease after you use an application of Reglone. So that's gonna, when we say we lock in that green, that's what we mean by that. In canola, you need to spray when 90% or more of the individual seeds have turned brown on the entire plant across the whole field. And then you need to harvest your canola as soon as dry down is complete. So you need to get in there really quick. And you know, you're talking probably 5 days, maybe 3 days with really good weather. So you need to be, this is actually a really good tool to use for, you know, bringing in the canola. If you've got canola fields that are getting very close to being ready, and, you know, when you're trying to time your harvest operations for, you know, get your harvest management, you know, get your harvesting schedule going, you know, this is a really good tool to use, but you need to be aware, like you when these fields are ready to harvest, you need to go. They can't sit and wait. With our pod shatter varieties, we, you know, obviously we have a lot more leeway, but you still need to get in there because it does dry down very quickly, and then things are very dry at this point. Next slide, please. For field peas with Reglone, it's time to apply when the upper pods are kind of fleshy green or starting to turn yellow. Seeds might be immature, but they're still, you know, they're fully formed. Middle pods, they're light green to yellow, somewhat shrunken and leathery. So you start to see that wrinkly look on those pods. And seeds are full size and soft, but they're not juicy at all. And seeds will split when squeezed at this point. And for bottom pods, the bottom pods are dry and translucent. They'll rattle, and those seeds in those bottom pods are really hard. And so harvest timing, field peas will be ready for combining 5 to 7 days after spraying, depending on weather conditions. If significant rainfall occurs after application, the period between desiccation and harvest could be extended. And one thing to talk about too with Reglone is that it works really well. Ideally, the best time to put it on is kind of under, it's a contact herbicide. It works very quickly, but it's best to put it on kind of under cool, cloudy conditions if you can. That's when it will work the best. It's not best to put it on like on hot, sunny days, like really with intense sunlight. It's more the intense sunlight thing that we don't want. So you'll get your very best results if we do have a cool, cloudy day, or we have that period in the day or in the evening type thing, versus like putting it on let's say a day like today that's going to be very hot, really sunshiny. This afternoon is not the right time, not the best time to be putting Reglone on. So if we can, we kind of want to put it on again more towards the evening under some cloud cover. That gives it a far better chance to work. So with that, I wanted to move into we were going to talk about some difficult to control weeds. I did want to specifically talk about water hemp. We've got a lot of water hemp findings in the province all of a sudden. in the last just few days. So I just really need to talk to you guys about this because this is the right timing. When we're talking about water hemp, that's a tier 1 noxious weed. So in Manitoba, we have the Noxious Weeds Act. That's one of the oldest acts. It's been around since Manitoba became a province. And it was revamped in 2017. The weeds are put into tiers. Tier 1s are the worst weeds. They technically are not allowed to be in this province, or if they are here, they're in very isolated areas and they're not spreading. So what water hemp, palmer amaranth, weeds like that are on this list as a tier 1. And so that means that when we find them, they must be eradicated. There's zero tolerance for that. The tier 1 weeds have the potential to be devastating to to farmland, to the crops, to the ecosystems, to everything. And in particular, a lot of our weeds, actually, some of our tier 1 weeds, they're not necessarily weeds that will move into cropped land, but they can devastate natural areas, pastures and rangeland, and treat areas like wildlife management areas, things like that. This weed is something that will get onto cropland and will devastate cropland. So for tier 1s, these are the really bad ones that have the potential to affect basically all of the cropland in Manitoba. And so we've been very fortunate so far. We have not been dealing with this weed to the level that Ontario has it, that the United States has it. North Dakota, South Dakota, basically all through the states has been dealing with water hemp for years. It's resistant to multiple herbicide groups. It's a very aggressive weed. It's a very prolific seed producer, and the problem is you just can't get rid of it once it's here. So in Ontario, there are populations that are resistant to group 2, 5, 7, 9, and 14. Like that means it's resistant to all of those groups, not just 1 or 2 of those groups. It's resistant to all of them. Elsewhere in the world, the water hemp is resistant to groups 2, group 3, group 4, group 5, group 9, group 14, group 15, and group 27. There are populations in the world that there are no herbicides left that will kill this weed. They are hand weeding. There's no other option. If this weed is in their crop, they are hand weeding it out. So I just don't know how much more I can impress upon you guys how devastating this weed can be. A study in Ontario, I think recently showed a 99% yield loss in corn where water hemp had gone unchecked because it was not sprayable, it was resistant, and it caused 99% yield loss. It can cause, I think it's up to 94% yield loss in soybeans. Again, this thing is devastating. And the problem is it gets into our crops and we just don't have anything left to spray on them. For now, what we have in Manitoba has come in, it's mostly group 9 and group 2 resistant. We've been able to get rid of it as it comes in, but we've had a lot of sightings so far this year, so I just needed to refresh your memory on what some of this looks like, and I need you guys to keep checking for it. So there is zero tolerance for this weed. It's a tier 1 weed. It has to be destroyed. You cannot let it go to seed. Next slide, please, Lionel. So far in 2022, we are confirmed in Rhineland and Hanover. We've confirmed water hemp findings. We have submitted multiple samples for Morris RM and Dauphin. There are several cases actually in Clearfield canola. That's a first for Manitoba. There's not a lot of canola grown down in the States, so probably this might be a unique to Manitoba anyways. But our Clearfield canola, normally our Aries does such a good job of taking those weeds out, but the problem is that this water hemp is coming in. The water hemp that is arriving in Manitoba is already resistant to group 2 and group 9. So when you are spraying Aries on that canola, you're not going to get this weed. You've probably got all the other weeds out, but you're not going to get this one. And so we have been finding it in it's been found in several Clearfield canola fields already this year, and just simply because it's resistant to group 2. So that's really unfortunate. So normally we haven't been worried about looking for it in canola. We've been worried about finding it in our row crops. This is a weed that really likes direct sunlight. So especially in our row crops where there's a lot of bare ground and it takes a while for those crops to cover in, shade out the weeds underneath, then that's when we see water hemp gets a good start. And so we know it's also in we see it normally. We've been finding it in our soybean crops, so because they are sprayed with glyphosate, and lots of times they're row cropped, and so we end up finding this weed there. So we know it's also in our corn, our Roundup Ready corn, but we tend not to see it as much because even though this weed is 7 or 8 feet tall, at this point, our corn is tall as well. So we tend not to just see it there, but I'm sure there is some there. We just need to find it. And anyways, for all crops, keep scouting and investigate any tall weeds. There are a few other tall weeds out there in some canola fields. I've seen some very tall sow thistle. It'll be sticking up above the crop several feet or a couple of feet anyways, and even some really tall false ragweed, things like that. We have seen a bit of that this year. Our canola crops got off to a pretty rough start. Well, all of our crops did. It was very late, very wet, and a lot of our crops look amazing for the start they had. But in some of our canola crops, there are some thin spots and some lower plant populations. Again, that's where we are finding these water hemp in those kind of thin spots in those crops. And like I said, we're finding it in the Clearfield canola because the group 2 herbicide just isn't working on the water hemp. So timing is really critical. I personally have not found any plants with viable seed. Any pictures I've seen of other plants that have been pulled out do not have viable seed yet, but the seed heads are just forming now. But that window is closing very quickly. These are pigweeds. They can set viable seed within a couple of weeks. So I would say this is critical this week and next, for the next week or two, to really be watching those weeds and pull them out. We do not want this thing setting seed. There was a plant, I found a plant in a field up by Dauphin that I couldn't get in my car. It was very large. This plant is capable. I drive a Honda Civic, but I still couldn't get this thing in my car. It's not a very big car, but it was a very big weed. And I wouldn't have been able to put that in my car. That plant was so big. But it was in an area in the field that there was no canola growing because it had drowned out earlier in the year. And this weed was sitting there. But a plant like that is capable of producing up to 1 million seeds, which are, so we do not want plants like that to produce any seed. So they need to be gone before they set seed. So if we can go to the next slide, Lionel. So this is one of the plants I found so far this year. This is not a particularly big one as water hemp goes. It's 8 feet tall. It's actually fairly wide around, but there's lots bigger than this. So it's fairly noticeable when you find this in your crop. And again, we're starting to see it in the canola as the canola table's over, it's kind of starting to, shrink down a bit. We're starting to see these weeds stick up above the crop. That's my guide to crop protection there just for size. And that's sitting on a 6-foot table here in the boardroom in Carmen. And when you look, that second picture there on the right-hand side, that's the seed heads on it. So these things look like red root pigweed, but the seed heads, when they do have seed heads, are very distinctive. They're kind of really long and skinny, snake-like, like very long. Those seed heads can be 1 foot long. And if you look at red root pigweed, the seed heads on that are more like a bottle brush. They're kind of round, they're kind of clustered together, they're shorter, much different shape to that seed head. Now, this was a male plant. There was no seed in this plant. There are male plants and female plants, but this one was a male, so there would not have been seed anyways. But still, if there had been any females around, obviously they could have been fertilized and they would be forming seed now. So this is, again, we pulled this plant, it's gone. There was only one in this case. It's just a random plant in the middle of a soybean field. And but they're very distinctive, and so please be watching for this. So I'll just show you, if we can just go to the next slide, Lionel, just a few pictures of what I saw last year. We had a soybean field down south of Ida that was infested, absolutely infested, hundreds of thousands of plants in it. And this is what it looked like about this time last year, maybe a few weeks earlier, actually. I think this was in early August. This is what it looked like. The farmer had noticed that all of a sudden something was sticking up above his soybeans. And these soybeans were quite tall. They were up to my armpits. They were a tall soybean variety. So again, this weed is about maybe my height, maybe 5.5 feet tall by now. There by the end, and there wasn't any really large, really tall ones in this, but he did see this sticking up. Some of these were approaching 6 feet tall. If we can go to the next slide. So just to show you how big these plants can get in one growing season, that's my glove on the ground. We were pulling these out. I was trying to pull that out. It broke off at the base. It was probably 1.5 inches in diameter across. I could not pull this out. You would need to dig some of these out. The problem with pulling them out, pulling those big ones out, is that root will regrow and set seed probably this year, if it's not either cultivated or sprayed again, like with something like 2,4-D or something like that. Obviously, Roundup isn't going to work on this because they're glyphosate resistant. This plant was glyphosate resistant. So we can go to the next slide, but some of these plants are monstrous. They're, like I said, I couldn't get this one plant in to fit in my car. Next slide. So again, now the glyphosate on this one, like some of these that looked a bit funny. The growing point had been affected. They had been shrunk somewhat. There was a few funny leaves on it. These are plants that had got 2 shots of glyphosate, a liter of glyphosate each time. And so it had affected them, but it slowed them down a bit. So some of these plants actually still had some, I guess they were only partially resistant, I guess is how you'd say it, but they were still going to set seed, maybe not as much seed as the others, but the majority of the water hemp in that field did not look like this. It was absolutely untouched by the glyphosate, but the odd plant in there had been affected a little bit, so it might have had some partial tolerance there. Next slide, please. So again, these are just looking down in the soybean canopy, like the ones for every one that was sticking up above the canopy, there's probably 10 that were exactly the same height of the soybeans. So when you walk through that field, basically every other plant was a water hemp. I don't know how it got that bad. I honestly don't know how that person did not notice it before then, but the history on this field had been, it was in a corn soybean rotation with nothing but glyphosate used on it, I think in about 5 years. So it was getting 2 shots of glyphosate and maybe some in the spring as well, but it was getting at least 2 shots of glyphosate in season for 5 years in a row. And obviously the water hemp came from somewhere. We don't know exactly where it came from, but once it got there, it was surviving and it was thriving. It was doing very well on this field. So that field was actually mowed down. It was impossible to pull those weeds out. So that was mowed. There's a very good pigweed guide. If you want, you just Google OMAFRA Pigweed ID Guide. It shows up in a couple of different spots on the internet through a grower newspaper down there. And also, I'm not sure that you can find it on the OMAFRA their own website. I'm not sure. I haven't been able to find it there, but I just Google it and it'll come up, and it's a really nice pigweed guide. You can download it and put it on your computer, or you can just flip through it on the screen. It's really nice, got lots of pictures. Very good guide for telling the different pigweeds apart. And so know the species. The PSI lab in Winnipeg, which is just off Pembina Highway there. I think it's on Chancellor, but by just opposite the entrance to the University of Manitoba. Free DNA testing for Manitoba Canola Growers Association. So PSI Lab is the same lab that's doing all the testing for the glyphosate-resistant kochia, the club root for canola. They're doing the blackleg testing. They're doing a number of tests. And so because it's owned by Manitoba Canola Growers Association, as long as your farmers are members of MCGA, which means you're paying the check off, not asking for it back, then you basically are getting free testing on a number of things at PSI. But they are doing the speciation, I guess, or they'll tell you which species of amaranth it is, and so you can do that. And it works on fresh tissue, and so you don't need very much. You just drop off a little bit of leaves, and then they will run it. They'll do the testing on it to know which species we're dealing with. Now, we are sending our samples away that I've been finding for resistance testing. That's done in Ontario. When we find water hemp, I'm just assuming that it's group 2 and group 9 resistant, because the bulk of the water hemp found in Manitoba has been so far. And when it comes back, it might be resistant to more groups than that, but we're basically assuming most of it is already group 2 and group 9 resistant. Other groups, again, we don't know. But this severely limits your ability to grow soybeans and corn, also sunflowers, dry beans, and basically any row crop. Your options in some of those crops, your post weed control options are limited anyways, and most of the products that you're using aren't going to work. So we need to be talking, and we don't have time to talk about it today, but we need to be talking about planning for those pre-emerge products that have residual, in order to take some of these weeds out before they even emerge, and then having a system in place using different herbicide groups to go after these once they are to go after them post-emergent, if they start showing up in your crops. But we are, so far this year, we've seen a lot more this year already than we did last year. That's not surprising. It was lots of moisture. This is a weed that does very well. It did well last year too when it was so dry, but it does really, really well under moist conditions, hence the name. It's called water hemp. Also, we've had some flooding. We've had lots of floodwaters in the province, and so we think that some of it's been moving around that way, been coming up from the south where they have such tremendous problems down in north, just right across the border. So it's definitely getting here. Once it's here, we're trying to eradicate it as soon as we find it. So if you have any suspicions on any weeds, please let us know, give me a call, send me some pictures, but again, it's really important to be investigating this right now. So that's all I had on that. I don't know, Lionel, if you had other questions on other weeds, but like I said, I did want to really focus on the water hemp today.
Okay, yeah, there's a few questions that have come in. I'm just going to go back to this slide here. I think somebody wanted just to see, I guess, where they could find this. And so you said this was in Ontario?
Yeah, the Ontario, I'm dealing with Harvest Genomics. And if anybody wants, I'll send you the information, but you can Google that and find it. His name is Chris Granger, but it's Harvest Genomics. I'm actually working with OMAFRA, and I'm sending my samples in through them. So I'm not sure. I know you can send stuff privately to him, but you Google that. I do have sample kits here in the office. They need a very small amount of tissue, like a quarter-size piece of tissue, and basically they just do it off dry tissue. So I have kits here in the office where I have I just put a leaf in a small coin envelope basically and label it. Now a lot of the stuff I've been getting in, I don't know specific fields sometimes, but I at least want to know the RM so that people know we can be updating our maps and that people know that other farmers in that RM are aware. Again, anyways, we label the sample and we actually pack it in a little bag with silica beads in it to dry it out, and then I purulate it with next day service to make sure it gets there as quickly as possible to Ontario. After that, the testing does take a little bit. Like, I haven't got any results yet on the stuff I've sent away, but it's only been in the last probably 10 days that I've been sending samples. So the PSI lab will tell you the species, and they've been doing that for me very quickly, usually within a few days, but they are starting to get busy because they are starting to get a lot more samples in. And some of the samples come back not water hemp, they come back as other pigweeds, which is good. But most of the submitted samples have been coming back as water hemp.
Okay, one question that actually got texted into me is they're wondering how is it spreading? It seems like it got up to Dauphin, and Dauphin seems like kind of fairly far away from kind of Ontario and in the States. So I guess the question is can it be coming in seed?
I guess, I mean, it could be. Anything can come in seed. I mean, the problem is these are tiny, tiny seeds. I mean, I don't know that that's how it's spreading. It's a possibility. Everything's a possibility right now. Any trucks that are going cross border and moving corn or soybeans, bringing any of those up from the States could possibly be bringing seeds, could possibly be bringing water hemp seeds with them. This is a pigweed, so these seeds are tiny. So think red root pigweed seeds. They're tiny, tiny, tiny seeds. It's not hard for them to catch a ride anywhere, again, on a vehicle, on a piece of equipment, anything. It might be coming in the seed, but we haven't seen any pattern or anything like that. We do know that it travels in the digestive tract of migrating waterfowl, and it can travel thousands of kilometers that way. So basically, the birds are eating down south and dropping it as they're flying over type thing. So it could be moving that way as well. We know the bulk of our sightings or findings so far have been in southern Manitoba, have been very close to the US border, have been very close to waterways that bring water up from the US. So we know that's where it started coming in Manitoba, but having said that, that's not all the fields. So it's getting here other ways, and we're trying to track it down. But again, we're doing our best, and it's just trying to figure out where this is actually coming from. And yeah, like I said, there's no pattern in the canola. It's not a specific variety or anything like that. It's not like that. It just, the reason it's in the Clearfield canola is because the Aries just can't work on it when it's resistant to group 2. It just can't. So it could very well be in all of in bigger canolas. It's just that the glufosinate working on it, right? So, you know, there might have been lots in other canola fields, but the glufosinate worked. We don't have a lot of Roundup Ready canola in the province, and we certainly don't have very much down here in southern Manitoba. So, you know, we would, if we did have Roundup Ready canola in this area, or we had some fields of it, I'd be checking those too, because we know it's glyphosate resistant. But yeah, it could be hit.
Oh, sorry.
It could be. Oh, sorry. It could be hitching a seed. Like, again, any trucks that are going cross border, if anybody's bringing equipment up from the States, you need to really, really, really be trying to get that cleaned. But having said that, it's almost impossible to clean these pigweed seeds out. They're so tiny. But do your best.
Good comment about the trucks, because there's been a lot of cracked corn being brought up, especially in our feed situation over the last year or so. So we could be seeing some of it brought up that way as well.
Right. And well,
sorry.
and those trucks are used to backhaul something. So are they moving fertilizer? You know, what else are they moving? Because they don't travel back empty, right? They're moving loads around. So basically, if a seed gets in and comes up in a load of something, it can get moved around when something else goes in that truck, right? It can get moved around that way.
Okay. Couple quick questions regarding I guess our pre-harvest. One question was, why is there minimum days to harvest when you spray a product like Regulon?
That, I guess, that's off the label. So I guess that's on the label. There would be, technically, yes, there should not be any movement of that, and there won't be any movement of that into the seed. I'm not sure. I guess that's just making sure. And also too, you want to give the product enough time to work. Like especially if you do have a lot of lush green material, it does take time to dry it down. But I think I know where the question is coming from. If it's a contact herbicide, there should be absolutely no way it gets into the seed. We shouldn't be worried about MRLs or maximum residue limits in the seed, like we are with glyphosate. Yeah, but that's just more so maybe like for harvest management, to make sure that product dries everything down as well as it can, especially if you're talking about a big crop.
Okay, and one last question. If you have hard to kill weeds, is there anything else you could add to speed the kill up and dry it up? So I guess they're wondering if you could be, and I'm just going to throw this part out, they're wondering if you can add, another contact herbicide. Yeah.
Well, there is AIM, and I apologize, I didn't put AIM or carfentrazone on there. That is another contact herbicide. It's tank mixed with glyphosate. I don't know of a lot of use of that. AIM is a contact, or carfentrazone is a contact herbicide. It is a bit more slower acting than some of the other contact herbicides, but it still is, fairly, obviously it's quite fast. It's just not the fastest one out there. Otherwise, I think you need to stick to the label, especially when we're dealing with anything with glyphosate, because that is a systemic. And you need to stick to labels. With the heat products, you need to use merge, because that, it works with merge, things like that. Otherwise, again, you have to stick to labels when you're talking about this close to the end of harvest. When we're talking about spraying it right close to combining, we need to worry about maximum residue limits and things like that. If you're spraying at the right time and everything is drying down, you shouldn't be getting anything in that seed, but we know that doesn't always happen. So you need to be careful and stick to labels, especially now.
Okay. Well, thanks, Kim. We're going to go back to my slides now, and I'm going to go right into the crop scouting panel, and we have Timmy Auger as a guest on our panel today, and I was talking to him and was just talking about a couple of questions. Producers are starting to think about fall frost and how to make cropping decisions. What is our normal frost days, and what does the forecast look like over the next say week to 10 days. So I think Timmy put a couple slides together, so we'll give him the screen, Lori.
Okay. Oh, I'm actually not sure which of the screens is showing up. I've got two screens here.
I can see your desktop with all your.
Okay, the messy desktop. Okay.
Looks like mine.
Okay, yeah, well, I prepared just about 5-6 slides, and I think let's see if I'm able to get
Yeah,
that.
now just go into presenter mode.
Okay, let's swap that. There you go. Okay, so yeah, I decided to just put something together briefly, and with September approaching, I know what's been on the mind of some producers have been, when are we going to have the first fall frost? And I just put together these maps. It's going to be on our website later today or tomorrow, and it's based on historical weather data over the last 52 years or so, between 1961 and 2012, and it shows the various risk of the date in which we'd expect to see the first fall frost. And I'm going to pick on the area around Altona, and this is the 10% risk, which means that you would expect that the first fall frost would occur maybe earlier in 1 out of 10 years. So the 10% risk means 1 out of 10 years. Now, we don't know which one of the 10 years it's going to occur, but this map is just simply looking at the 52 years worth of data and displaying the dates. So around the central southern Manitoba, 1 in 10 years would expect the first fall frost to occur between September 12 and September 16. And if you go to the northwest region around the Riding Mountain National Park, the Duck Mountain Park, then that would have actually occurred in 1 out of 10 years. Thankfully, we've not seen that occurred yet. Going to 1 out of 4 years, this is the map, and you'd see that the dates are slightly later than the 10% risk map. And going to 1 out of 2 years, so this is the average date. This is what is most likely to occur. In most years, 1 in 2 years, you'd expect that around that Altona area, you'd have the date of first fall frost occurring towards the last week in September. I decided to put this together just looking at Altona over the last 10 years, and you'd note the 50% first fall risk, 1 out of every 2 years, actually ideally should fall after 2015. So you should have 5 years above and 5 years below. But we seem to have a trend of later fall frost is what it seems to be showing. At least in the last 10 years, we've only had 3 years in which the fall first frost occurred earlier than the 50% mark of September 24. And even with the 2020 that I included here on September 9, it was a very mild frost, minus 0.4 degrees, and it only occurred for a few minutes. So yeah, technically it's still a frost, but it's not a killing frost by any means. So we seem to be having that slightly late frost. Last year, the frost did not occur until the 3rd week in October. That's actually one of the latest I've seen looking at the data. And yeah, the 25% actually was almost bang on. 25% risk, that is 1 out of every 4 years. For that area is September 18. And from this distribution of data over the last 10 years, we see that yeah, only 2 out of the 10 years had frost earlier than the September 18, which is the 1 out of every 4 years. And the 1 out of every 10 years out as well was bang on. We only had 1 occurrence of frost in the last 10 years at that location. So pretty much what this is saying is, I do hope that we have a late frost this year, similar to what we had last year. We don't know exactly when it's going to occur, but if looking at the next few weeks, at least this is the 1 week temperature forecast, it's actually going to be really, really good for harvest period. We are likely going to see temperatures in the 30s in southern Manitoba over the next few days. I think we only have 2 days in which the maximum temperature will be below 25 degrees. Most days over the next 1 week or so would be really, really hot. So that's a really good drying condition for harvest. But with that, I also always like to throw in a caution that when you have excess heat, it's likely going to drive some localized thunderstorm. Right now, none of the forecast over the next 1 week or so is showing any significant precipitation right now. However, with how hot things are likely going to get, there is that risk of a thunderstorm developing. The good thing is that we have the high pressure system settling over much of the province. So again, I think we are in for a very good ride over the next week or so. Looking at the longer range temperature forecast for September, so this was issued on August 25th, and it covers August 29 up until September 26. And you would notice that there's really a pocket around the central and southwest Manitoba that the probability is equal of being either below normal or above normal. So it's likely going to be around normal in that pocket of the province. But in the southeast corner of the province, there is the probability, excuse me, that the temperature will be above normal. And looking at a further longer range, a 3-month range, 3-month range probability is that much of the province would be above normal in terms of temperature. So that's actually a good thing if we think about fall frost as well, if we are going to stay above normal. Not every day will be above normal, obviously, but that's the trend that we are expecting. On the precipitation front, using the CFS model, it actually shows that we would be slightly drier than normal. So we are going to be about half an inch to about an inch drier than normal, which again can be good for harvest, or is actually something good for harvest season. And the Environment Canada forecast for the 3 months, September, October, November, again, precipitation is highly variable, so it's not showing anything for Manitoba. It's yet to be seen what would happen over the next 3 months. But Lionel, that's all I have.
Okay, well, that's pretty good news, Timmy. So I think a lot of people were wanting to hear that with hopefully some good drying conditions and some good warm weather. That's what we need to bring this crop in. So some good information, Timmy, and thanks for bringing that on.
Yeah, thank you.
So Flora, if you can give the screen back to me.
Yep, you should have it, Lionel.
Okay, I still see Timmy, so.
Check to the sharing tab at the top and see if you can just share. Okay, I'll bring it back to me and then shoot it back to you. See if that helps.
Okay, thanks.
Your computer might be a little bit napping. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, good. Okay, good. Thanks, Lorraine.
You're welcome.
So I guess just a few slides to end for today. Wanted again to mention about the clean farms, and if you've got unwanted pesticides or livestock medications on the farm and want to get rid of them, these are the following dates that they'll be in different locations throughout the province. So definitely take advantage of that. I talked to Lori at the beginning of the webinar this morning, and our Manitoba hay listing service is being fairly busy. So if you've got hay for sale or you're looking to buy hay, definitely go to that site, and or if you're wanting to put some on, just call our 1-800 number, and somebody there will definitely help you get your hay listing on. Reminder about the crop residue burning as we get into harvest, and we're going to see some fields be done. Make sure you're following the guidelines for crop residue burning. Again, our crop extension specialists throughout the province. There's our name and contact, as well as our new crop extension specialist in Gimli. Veronica's there, and I got her phone number now, so that's the phone number for Veronica. So if you're in that area and would like some information, feel free to call her. Our livestock people, they're probably getting busy now with a lot of producers are doing feed testing. That's increased a lot over the last little while here. So I'm going to be guessing they're going to be busy doing rations for producers. So if you're looking to do a ration, feel free to contact any one of these extension specialists. Our MASC service centers, numbers are there. If you're a lot of those offices have some of the supplies that we used to have in the ag offices. So definitely if you're looking for a feed probe or you're looking for information on getting samples away, contact them. And if you've got questions, feel free to contact Lori or myself and join us next week. It'll be September 7th, and I'm going to hold Timmy on his comments there that we're going to have a great harvesting week here, and we'll get our numbers up from 3% or 6%, I think we are in the province, which is well below our 5-year average, to getting up there to getting closer to 30–40% done. So thanks for joining, and thanks for my guest speakers.